COVID-19 infections have peaked on April 24th or so, Americans assumed. The state health authorities reported 36,738 new cases that day, a record. By mid-May, the United States has reduced that rate of infection by nearly half to 17,618. On May 11th, the accomplishment had come at a tremendous cost. The lockdown of much of the national economy, Great Depression levels of unemployment, the shift to online schooling for millions of children, families denied final visits to dying loved ones. Still, these sacrifices had delivered the desired result. Had that progress continued, the American people and the American economy could have likely foreseen a further decline in cases and perhaps a near end to the pandemic even before a vaccine. But that's not what happened. On June 24th, the number of infections surpassed the April 24th peak. On June 25th, the number surpassed that of June 24th. On June 26th, the country suffered almost 46,000 new infections, which is nearly 10,000 more in one day than on the worst day in April. All of the sacrifices of the past weeks have been thrown away. The first coronavirus spike in late April can be blamed on 45's negligence. The second spike in June is his own doing. This is 45's plague now. A Washington Post report that came out on June 27th captures 45's culpability with horrible aptness. The city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, has been enforcing social distancing rules, and for good reason. From June 1st to June 15th, the new COVID-19 cases in the state jumped from 67 in a day to 186. In advance of 45's Klan rally in Tulsa on June 20th, city employees affixed "Do Not Sit Here, please" stickers to every other seat in the stadium menu. The 45 campaign workers were captured on video removing the stickers so that 45 could cram attendees closer together. On June 26th, Oklahoma reported 396 new infections in that day. 45's Klan rally may not directly account for all those new cases, but 45's elevation of the needs of his own ego over the well-being of even his strongest inbred supporters is profoundly implicated in the virus' powerful June comeback. Even before the viral peak on April 24th, 45 urged the reopening of the U.S. economy. On April 16th, 45 convened the nation's governors by conference call to press them to lift restrictions by May 1st. The White House that day also released a set of highly permissive guidelines to inform the process, recommending a 3-day phase plan to begin after states had established a 14-day downward trajectory of documented cases. Trajectory of what? How steep of a decline? Those decisions were left to the governors at least. You're going to call your own shots, 45 told the governors on the call. You're going to be calling the shots. We'll be standing right alongside of you, and we're going to get our country open and get it working. People want to get working, yeah, but not in this fucking case. At the time, this show of deference to the governors looked like a political retreat by the squatter. Days earlier, 45 had declared that he alone had total authority to reopen the economy, which he doesn't, and it would be the biggest decision that he's ever made. But the deference soon proved to be a sham. 45 was set on the wildest and earliest possible opening, and he exerted the immense political power of his office to get that wish. In mid-April, the protesters, many of them openly brandishing weapons, assembled the capitals of the Democratic governed states to demand immediate reopening, which with tweets, "Liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia, and save your Second Amendment," it is under siege, which it really wasn't. From mid to late April, the trajectory of infections in states such as Georgia, Florida, and Texas were relatively flat, not down. Despite that, 45 cheered for governors to reopen fast and faster. On April 29th, 45 declared that federal social distancing guidelines would be fading out. "I am very much in favor of what they're doing," 45 said in the Oval Office about the southern and western governors who were racing to reopen by May 1st. The governors were responding to political pressures from local business owners, yes, but they were also obeying the squatters' wishes and yielding to pressure from right-wing media. At first, Faux News host and guest had dismissed a COVID-19 as a Democratic plot against the 45 economy, which it really wasn't. Just one example of many. On March 9th, Sean Insanity said they're scaring the living hell out of people. That's what you guys are doing on Faux, so don't be trying to push this off. And I'm seeing them as like, oh, okay, let's bludgeon 45 with this new hoax. Then in mid-March, the network abruptly switched its editorial line. Host not only voiced concern, but adamantly denied that they ever done otherwise. This program has always taken the coronavirus seriously, and we've never called the virus a hoax. Yes, you guys did, so quit fucking lying, Insanity. But as 45 pressed for reopening, the Faux News line shifted again. Host and guests tumbled over one another to demand more reopenings, faster and bigger, and basically to shit any continuing danger from coronavirus. The virus just isn't nearly as deadly as we thought it was, all of us included on the show. Everybody thought it was, but it turned out not to be. Fucker Carlson said on his program. And Fucker Carlson's a fucking retarded idiot anyway. On April 29th, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, another fucking moron, appeared on the Insanity program to tout his state's triumph over the virus. We know who the vulnerable populations are. We know if you look at the statistics for people under 50 who don't have chronic conditions, you have an extremely low chance of death from this virus in those situations. We know how to protect folks and social distance between those two groups, and so I think that there's a lot of things we've learned over the last 6 weeks, so I think we can take a deep step forward here in May and continue to build on that and get America back. On May 3rd, 45 staged his notorious town hall in the Lincoln Memorial, a site usually forbidden to be used for partisan purposes, but accessed by 45 via a special exemption. 45 used the occasion to extort governors to reopen even faster than the guidelines had laid out. There's not too many states that I know of that are going up. Almost everybody is headed in the right direction. Technically, they're not. We're on the right side of it. No, you guys are not. But we want to keep it that way. We also want to get back to work. Technically, you don't do any fucking work anyway because you're golfing all the fucking time. He praised states that were moving quickly to reopen their economies and singled out Virginia as a state that was moving too slowly. By this time, Republican-led states had begun letting their stay-at-home orders lapse, starting with Georgia on April 23rd. 45 initially praised the Georgia plan, then criticized it, but ultimately approved it. Texas followed on May 1st. Florida launched the first phase of its reopening on May 4th. 45 promised vaccines by the end of the year and a surge in economy by the third quarter of 2020. If anything contradicted all this happy talk, the Schroeder had his answer ready. The only reason the U.S. has reported 1 million cases of coronavirus is that our testing is so much better than any other country in the world. No, it's not. Other countries are way behind us on testing, and no, they're way ahead of us on testing. As 45 had hoped, good news began to arrive in the early part of May. Cases were trending down, as were deaths. On May 11th, he tweeted, coronavirus numbers are looking much better. Technically, they're not. And he says they're going down almost everywhere. They weren't. Big progress being made. Not really. 45 ran another victory lap on May 17th, doing really well medically on solving the coronavirus situation plague. It will happen that same day. The number of coronavirus cases is strongly trending downward throughout the United States, with a few exceptions. And what went wrong? Early reopening could only have worked if stringent safety measures, including the use of face masks and social distancing, were incorporated. Yet, the squatter sabotaged the reopening he himself had enforced. Throughout his squadroncy, 45 has subordinated rational policy in order to provoke the virulent culture wars, and the mask has become a clan symbol for his inbred supporters. 45 never wears a mask in public, and he has mocked Joe Biden for wearing one. I see Biden. It's like his whole face is covered. It's like he put a knapsack over his face. He probably likes it that way. 45 told the Wall Street Journal on May 21st. The journalist Michael C. Bender then followed up. He remarked that 45 often negatively commented on masks, especially when worn by the White House reporters. Do you view that as a protest of you? Do you feel like people wear masks to show their disapproval of you? 45 allowed that it could be, then attacked the health hazards of masks, then expressed indifference whether his inbred supporters wore them or not. Rush Limp Dick mocked the mask as a symbol of fear. It's technically not. On May 15th, the former faux anchor Brit Hume joined in. On May 27th, a writer at the Pro-45 web publication, The Federalist, posted a piece headline, "Mandatory masks aren't about safety, they're about social control," the author of Molly McCann wrote. If everyone is wearing a mask, it telegraphs a society-wide acceptance that the status quo has changed. That morning, a Pro-45 writer named Lee Smith tweeted a link to the article amplifying McCann's paranoia. Terrific at Mole McCann, a piece at Federalist. The masks aren't about public health, but about social control. The image of Biden in a black mask endorses culture of silence, slavery, and social death, which technically is not what it is. Smith is a major figure in the Pro-45 media landscape, formerly a Middle East correspondent for Bill Kristol's Weekly Standard, and still connected to the eminently mainstream Hudson Institute. He has plunged deep and thick into the Pro-45 calls. In the early morning of May 28th, Smith's tweet got a retweet from 45 himself. You might not imagine that there would be so much room to escalate anti-mask rhetoric from silence, slavery, and social death. You would be wrong. An Arizona city councilman derisively appropriated George Floyd's dying words, "I can't breathe," to mock mask wearing. Sebastian Gorka, a former 45 nutlicker, found a way to go even further than that on his June 23rd radio program. The caller says, "I wanted to discuss what I call the Democratic Islamo-Maoist masks that their dictators demand." And then he said, and Sebastian Gorka, being the inbred idiot that he is, he says, "You mean the COVID burqas, the COVID mask? You know, there's something inhumane about it, isn't there? The idea that you cover your face, not only does it dehumanize the individual in that interaction with another human being, but also it is your right and act of submission." It's not. Millions of citizens obeyed the cues from 45, the right-wing nut-licking media, and the medical crackpots who predominate Facebook. The great majority of Americans approve of mask wearing in public. Only 40% of the Republicans do. On June 20th, a short video showed up on Twitter of a middle-aged man in shorts trying to enter a Florida Walmart unmasked. When a mask store employee politely reminded the customer of store rules, the man shoved the employee so hard that the shover actually fell over from his own momentum. The customer got up and pushed the same employee again to force his way in. Perhaps the customer was carrying one of the fake anti-mask exemption cards now circulating on the internet and social media for printing at home. As the United States nears the 4th of July, the disease is reviving. Some 45 nutlickers want to blame the Black Lives Matter protests for the fact which they have nothing to do with. But the states that mounted the large protests have seen caseloads decline since George Floyd's death. Minnesota reported 645 new cases on May 26th and 493 on June 26th. New York had recorded 1,044, then 804 on the same date. Washington, D.C.'s 109 cases on May 26th fell to 26 by June 26th. Granted, not everybody who protested in those places lived in those places, or perhaps some demonstrators carried the virus to other states. But there's certainly no obvious link yet. Meanwhile, J.P. Morgan has found powerful connections between the rising restaurant spending and 3 weeks later the increasing the COVID-19 infections. The disease is spiking in places precisely where state governments hasten to reopen bars, casinos and restaurants, shopping malls, and other indoor places of entertainment. Phoenix, Houston, and other southern cities are suddenly reporting that the caseloads that look like New York City at its worst. Florida reported nearly 9,000 new infections on June 26, nearly equaling some of New York's worst days. Texas recorded almost 6,000 new cases that day. Arizona reported nearly 3,400 new cases on June 26 and now suffers more cases per capita than Brazil or any other country in Europe. In the face of this worsening crisis, 45 has not taken action. He's instead shifting the goalposts. Don't pay attention to the case rate, he now argues. Look at the death rate. Last week he retweeted, "Coronavirus deaths are way down. Mortality rate is one of the lowest in the world. Our economy is roaring back," which it's not, and will not be shut down. Numbers or flare-ups will be put out as necessary. But death lags behind infections, and a rise in cases in late June warns of more deaths to come in late July. We're already well past the death toll of 100,000 that 45 predicted at his own Lincoln Memorial Hall only 2 months ago. 45 hopes for a third quarter economic recovery are also blighted. Spending data suggests that the upward trajectory of May and early June has halted and reversed in the states that have opened. The slight uptick in employment in May now may prove abortive. For millions of American families, the hardest reckoning arrives on July 31st when the federal government stops supplementing the state's unemployment insurance benefits. Those who have kept their jobs face other hardships. While schools reopen in September, it looks more and more doubtful. At the onset, the pandemic was aggravated by 45's negligence and indifference. He had dismantled the country's pandemic preparedness. He denied the disease for 2 months. He made one crucial mistake after another. Even so, 45 could possibly shift at least some blame for the rebel of the disease. The pandemic did originate outside of the U.S. China did cover up the disease, and the World Health Organization did enable China. 45 could also argue that even those countries with the best responses were hit hard for many weeks. But what has happened in the U.S. in June and what will happen in July is entirely 45's fault. The squatter's approach to the virus has been guided by his lifelong beliefs. It's just as real to say you've done a good job as to do a good job. Denying you failed is just as real as actually succeeding. This time, though, Reality would not be blistered away. Tens of thousands are dead, and millions of people are out of work, all because 45 could not and would not do the job of a disease control, a job that includes setting a positive example to those Americans who trust and follow his leadership. I don't trust his leadership, and I don't follow his leadership because he's never been a leader. Across the rest of the developed world, COVID-19 has been ebbing. As a result, borders are reopening, economies are reviving. Here in the U.S., however, Americans are suffering a new disease peak worse than the rest, and worse than the worst of April. How lethal will this new peak be? Will we learn that the way we seem to learn everything in this era of 45 the hard way?